Do you like movies and games also? Listen, so much more, they all know. Vice, Lotus, and friends, welcome to Corrective Consciousness.
Welcome to Corrective Consciousness episode 144, the podcast where we explore the inanity of pop culture. I'm your host, vysethebold, and this is...
Lotus Prince.
And guess what kind of episode this is, because OldManStompy is here.
Magic the Gathering.
Everybody, you can turn to a Meg episode of Family Guy right now.
Jesus Christ. Lotus, you flipped a coin and you got it wrong.
Son of a... Even though I had the show notes right in front of me, I still got it wrong.
This is a Lotus Prince's mom-centered episode. We talk about quilts and...
Yeah, it was brilliant. I was like, thank you,
Rodgers
Mother,
and
for this
Hammerstein
quilts episode. Rodgers and Hammerstein.
That is something she's into, right?
Yep.
Musicals.
Yeah, huh?
Well,
okay.
if we ever feel the need to explore that subject space, then we
Yeah,
know
stay
to
tuned for next week's Corrective Consciousness, where we talk in depth about 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, and how the square dancing scene is legitimately good, even for me.
Well, I would talk
even
about
for
that.
Lotus.
That would be a great topic, like movies before we were born that we enjoy.
Oh, that would be a good topic. We should do that, actually.
But alas, it is not this week's topic.
Alas, it is a one of them terrible.
What? Are you making tea, Vice? Is it ready? Anyway, OldManStompy, please take us away from this.
How can I possibly follow that amazing lead-in?
Yeah, what a segue.
I just love that the CEO of the Segway company died on a Segway.
Well, I mean, he died off a cliff, but he was on a Segway at the time.
Yeah, which is the funniest.
I mean, he
way
died,
to die
he
on
died
a
the way
Segway.
he lived, like on a Segway.
That's like the best Segway death.
But even forgetting that it's a segue, like, what a cartoon way to, falling off a cliff. Yeah.
He dies like Gaston does at the end of the Beauty and the Beast.
Where there's 3 frames where you see skulls in his eyes that no one noticed until the internet.
But yes, OldManStompy, please give the masses what they want.
So I was invited on this week to talk about the follow-up to WrestleMania, since I was here 2 weeks ago to talk about the lead-in to WrestleMania. But I don't know, this last 10 minutes has been pretty fun, even though we didn't talk about wrestling at all.
I mean, we could talk about bullshit for a half hour. We have no
that's
problem
the start of this
coming up with
podcast.
content.
Yeah, that was the original format, for what it was worth.
Which wasn't bad, but
Okay.
anyway.
It was fun to talk about what games I was playing at the time, but then we realized that I'm playing something like Dark Souls, where I'm talking about the same
for
game
years,
for a month, and it's alright.
And also, sometimes you're done talking about the game, and you talk about it on every podcast anyway.
Yeah, the Binding of Isaac.
I was just gonna say, next time on Binding of Isaac talk.
Yeah, now it's the Binding of Isaac hour.
So before we talk about the actual WrestleMania event, I know Vice was one of the first people to communicate to our general friends that there had been a really severe incident at the Hall of Fame ceremony, actually.
Yeah, really crazy shit. Yeah, really I alluded to this on last week's podcast. I actually alluded to this.
Mm-hmm. So
go ahead, please.
So this year at the Hall of Fame, they had an unusual setup. Usually the Hall of Fame is done at an auditorium, and the only people, it's invite only. This is the first year they actually did the Hall of Fame ceremony at the stadium where WrestleMania takes place. So
this is the first year? Just
to frame, every year WWF does a Hall of Fame induction ceremony. There's no physical Hall of Fame. It's just a recognition of at least one wrestler from a whole bunch of different divisions and eras that they do every year, just to have something to celebrate before leading into the main WrestleMania event. So this year the Hall of Fame inductees were mostly tag teams. So you actually had a lot of 2-time inductees, people with 2 Hall of Fame rings. They had D-Generation X, which is the stable that Triple H and Shawn Michaels came up in. They were the big anti-authoritarian stable, opposed to Vince McMahon throughout most of the Attitude Era. And they actually had a revival. Shawn Michaels retired briefly in '99 because of a back injury and came back in the early 2000s. And DX actually had a second run with Triple H after most of the other members of the stable had gone on to other things. There was the Hart Foundation, which is Bret Hart and his brother, cousin, I think it was, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, who had passed away a couple of years ago. And they had been lobbying to get him into the Hall of Fame while he was still alive, since he had been having health troubles. He was in his 60s. Unfortunately, they did not manage to do that. So they had his daughter, who was an active and longtime performer in the women's division, Natalya, accept on his behalf. There was Harlem Heat, which is Booker T's stable, with I can't remember the other guy now. I didn't watch them. They were a WCW staple, so I can't remember who the Stevie Ray. He was the other member of that tag team. So Booker T was already in the Hall of Fame once as a world champion, but they were also an excellent tag team. Who else? Tori Wilson was the women's inductee. I can't remember who the celebrity inductee is now. Usually they have somebody who made an appearance at a few WrestleManias. They had and so the big story coming out was that somebody actually jumped the stands, since this was the first year that general admission was permitted, and like you could actually just buy tickets to the Hall of Fame ceremony and view it at the same stadium that the regular WrestleMania event was at. So somebody actually like ran the barricade, jumped the stands, and attacked and like tackled Bret Hart while he was in the middle of like giving his induction speech.
And well, that's the thing I didn't realize, is that this was the first year it was public. So like, there's a good message to like never do that again. You try it once and it immediately fucks up. Some
so there's a lot of randoms in the audience anyway, but they're all like people who are like on the fringes of like the wrestling families, or like know people in the industry. Not that there aren't like a whole bunch of crazy people in the industry already, but like this particular guy, like they followed him on Twitter. They found his like social media presence prior to his arrest, and like he really did not like Vince McMahon. He was, I don't want to say that specifically was why he chose to attack Bret Hart of all people, out of like anybody that you could have jumped up on stage to take down. But like he really had a chip on his shoulder.
But wasn't he frustrated that like wrestlers wouldn't respond to him on Twitter or whatever, and he's like, oh, I could take these guys myself, like I'm a bad at. Wasn't it something like that as well?
I mean, there's a lot. If you actually go to wrestling Twitter, you think regular Twitter is bad. You know, like some of the things that you should read.
I don't know. Marvel Twitter and Star Wars Twitter are really shitty.
Yeah, those are fun. Yeah.
Wrestling Twitter might actually be worse. It's a
really
lot
than Marvel. Like,
wrestling Twitter
terrible.
is real bad. I mean, like they're all like different brands of diarrhea. Like so,
yeah, that is true.
It really depends on what you have the stomach for. Like when you're browsing your social media landscape. But wrestling Twitter is real fucking bad. There's a lot of like RP guys who like pretend to be wrestlers and like try to start fights with like the actual wrestlers on Twitter, because they know that WWF uses social media to further feuds now, because so many people are paying attention to it, and it draws engagement to the product. So
plus Twitter in itself, and the concept and the way that people treat it, lends itself to like heels being able to promote themselves.
Yep.
Like the vitriol that is allowed and the pulpit that you're given on Twitter to express your opinions is very much something that a heel would use.
It's easy to say something like short and satisfying, but it's hard to say something like difficult and constructive. So that's why Twitter.
And
that's why most like social media communities often degrade without extensive moderation. And like the wrestling Twitter is no different. But anyway, so this guy jumped the barricade. Aside from the initial concern, like obviously Bret Hart is I think he's 61. He's not a young guy. He's pretty well built. He's in good health for his age, but he's put a lot of miles on his body from all the wrestling.
Sure.
He's not notorious for taking steroids and painkillers and being addicted to drugs like a lot of guys in that era.
He's also a good guy too. From a lot of like he's generous to fans. From what
he sounds like an exceptional member of the community. Anything against him has been that he's been like a bit of a perfectionist and he's got something of an ego. But he might be one of the 3 or 4 best American wrestlers to ever live. So he probably deserves to carry at least a little bit of that chip on his shoulder. And also, he should be mad at the industry because it killed his brother. You know, Owen Hart died in the ring in 1999 at a WWF pay-per-view. And
very famously on camera.
Well, I mean, he wasn't like, they didn't show his body on camera. They cut away almost immediately. And they didn't focus on it or anything. But they did continue to do the rest of the pay-per-view in spite of the fact that he died on Impact, which was something that always really bothered him. And on top of that, so Bret Hart is responsible for one of the most famous, not responsible. He was involved in one of the most famous incidents in wrestling history, which is the Montreal Screwjob. That was when Bret Hart had been offered this like ridiculous contract to stay with the WWF after Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man and a bunch of other talent had left to jump ship to WCW. Vince really wanted to lock down Bret Hart, but it seemed like that contract was too much even for Hart. Like, Bret Hart is not a star at Hogan's level in terms of the amount of merchandise that he draws. He doesn't make them as much money as that contract was going to cost. So when Hart got his offer from WCW, Vince told him, they negotiated an exit that even though Bret was under contract for like 20 years, and he had the title, he was the guy who was given the title as the next babyface. He was supposed to lose it to Shawn Michaels after Hogan left. And so in Montreal, which is Bret Hart's hometown, he had agreed to lose the title to Shawn Michaels on the way out the door. And Vince got paranoid or something. Nobody knows exactly what's going on in Vince's head. He's insane. But in the middle of the match, while Shawn Michaels had Bret Hart in Bret's submission, the sharpshooter, Vince ran out and asked the referee to ring the bell, ending the match, even though Bret didn't tap, and just screwed him out of the title in front of his hometown fans.
Which is the worst way.
Which is just awful. I think the story always goes that Hart went backstage and just like slugged McMahon in the face, walked out, and we expected to never see him on WWF television again. But of course, like, money fixes a lot of problems, and he was back like 15 years later. And at WrestleMania 27, they had Bret Hart inducted into the Hall of Fame for the first time in a match where like he and the rest of the living members of the Hart family just beat the shit out of Vince McMahon uncomfortably for like 20 minutes.
Jesus.
So I guess that was the penalty for like fucking him over all those years ago. And then supposedly, like, as punishment for the way that Bret treated or like responded to the WWF in the coming years, that was why Owen was assigned the gimmick that led to him dying in the ring in '99. So like, it's one of the darker chapters in wrestling history, and it is one of the primary reasons why you should never view the current leadership of WWF as like any kind of like decent people. That really pulled the curtain back on how shitty they were. Anyway, so obviously Bret has managed to bury that hatchet. He is not like, he doesn't seem to be like obviously angry at Shawn Michaels anymore. He can stomach being around Vince McMahon for a little while. He showed up at the Hall of Fame ceremony, wound up getting tackled by this guy. He's 61, so like, like at that age, even though that fall might not kill you, complications from that kind of thing might be like really dire. Like he
might even have like joint problems or have some kind of like circulatory issue because of it.
So famously, Dusty Rhodes, who's another like legend from the 70s and 80s, he passed away a few years ago in his 60s from complications stemming from a fall in the house, just like a regular fall. Like at that age, you never take anything for granted. So it seems that Bret's okay. I think he went to the hospital because he had some other like minor sickness coming into the event, but he seems to be in good spirits and good health. He seems like he's been like, every time he's shown up on WWF television, he seems like he's in pretty good health. But somewhat tragically, out of all the wrestlers that he's been involved with as part of the Hart Foundation and in the various stables that he's been a part of over the years, like basically all of them are dead except for him. There are lots of images, like really upsetting images that you look at from like the 80s, back when he was really big.
Hulk Hogan's really the only one around, and he's dead to a lot of people.
Well, I don't like Hogan. Like Ric Flair is still around. There's lots of people who are still alive, but specifically like guys who had tag teamed, guys who were members of like the Canadian stables that Bret Hart was a member of. Like all the people that he worked with really closely over the course of the business, a lot of them have passed away. They're all gone. The British Bulldog is gone. Davey Boy Smith is gone. Like, it's pretty upsetting, and you can tell that that's what took the toll on him the worst, and that's what he wants to prevent. That's what he wants to talk about when he like gives his speeches. So it feels like he's the worst person in the world that you want to like personally attack. Aside from what we've sort of talked about in private before this podcast, like how stupid do you have to be to think that you'll be able to like jump a ring surrounded by people who are like at best
bound
and, like,
muscle
at
men.
worst they're like 300-pound bodybuilders.
Yeah, I was
and
gonna
at
say, you're
worst, like,
surrounded by professional fucking wrestlers. Like, you're
like,
gonna die.
a lot of them, like so there's a guy, Heath Slater. He's like arguably the lowest of the low, like the worst jobber in WWF, or one of them anyway. And he's still like an actual like Golden Gloves boxer, which is an amateur boxing tournament in New York City. So like he can kick your ass, and like he's the bottom of the totem pole in WWF. At the top, you've got like fucking Brock Lesnar, you know, who's like a legit like one of the best MMA
Monster Man.
Yeah.
and he's definitely
He's
in
huge.
the that must be terrifying. So they have, you know, Braun Strowman. He's like the current 300-pound monster, and they show, or maybe 350 by now, with all the muscle he's put on recently. And they saw that they showed that like as this guy was getting escorted out after he'd gotten the crap kicked out of him by like all the earliest responders, like Braun came over like just to get his licks in, and that must be fucking terrifying to be like carried away by a bunch of like heavies and then see like a guy
this guy
who
was
dwarfs
already
all of
pounded
them.
on the ground like
Yeah.
by a bunch of dudes. First of all,
Oh,
a bunch of these guys dogpiled him in the ring.
Oh,
And
Travis Brown, Ronda Rousey's husband, who was also an MMA fighter, like was one of the first people to jump in. So,
Oh,
like,
shit.
He did not. And there's an image going around Twitter of, I think it's Dash Wilder, who's one of the
Yes.
tag team wrestlers.
That's the
who
video
just, like,
I saw. He just slugged him once in the
just like
face.
it was like kind of walks up in his,
after they had gotten him up and walking.
Yeah, they were walking him out and just kind of like pops him real quick.
and then he
like
walks
right in the fucking schnoz
Yeah.
too. Oh,
Yeah, it was brutal.
Oh, he
I think
wrecks
like I
it.
saw one of the security guys like get him on the shoulder, like, okay, buddy, that's enough, and just try to walk him away.
So
Yeah.
there's an interesting bit of history, like a couple of years ago at WrestleMania, Rob Gronkowski actually jumped, who's a tight end for the New England Patriots, actually jumped the stands to get involved in a planned angle in a battle royal at WrestleMania 2 years ago, and one of the security guards actually didn't know that this was an angle and tried to stop him from coming into the ring.
Oh,
and like
no.
almost screwed up the entire thing. So like. You know, there's nothing like the Monica Seles incident. For those unfamiliar, like the female tennis player Monica Seles got stabbed on the court by a crazed fan
yeah.
in the middle of a match a few years ago. I don't think like anything like that where somebody's actually like suffered a life-threatening injury in the ring as a result of a fan has ever happened. There's a really funny picture of the Shield, you know, Roman Reigns, Rollins, and Ambrose, where like a guy in the Shield attire, like kind of like jumps up, and he looks like he belongs there. So it takes like security a little while to realize that he's not supposed to be there, even though it's just like a weird looking ball guy who's kind of like giving Roman Reigns a side eye. And like eventually he gets tackled, but like they look at each other like is he the fourth guy? Like are we supposed to? Is this an 8-on-8, a 4-on-4 match now? It was kind of funny, but generally speaking, it's like wrestling is so kayfabe that it's always a little nerve-wracking when somebody jumps the barricade, right? You never know entirely what's going on. And actually, this the reason I want to spend so much time on this is it might have actually ruined somebody else's career in another promotion, like this specific event, because there's a tag team that used to wrestle for WWF, Enzo and Big Cass. So Enzo was a little guy. His gimmick was kind of that he was like a Jersey Shore reject. He had that kind of personality, and from what I've heard, it was also his actual personality, just like kind of cranked up to 11 for wrestling. Okay, I shouldn't say that. So there's a saying about wrestling that like the most successful characters are people who have their regular personality turned up to 11. But like what I heard about this guy was that his wrestling persona was his real life persona, like turned down to like a 5. So you know how popular, like how lovable the Jersey Shore guys are, right? They're not. They're a bunch of assholes. So
one of them is currently on his way to jail.
Yeah,
I think
prison.
that was the case. Like while they were
The
filming
most
the
prominent-
most recent version, of the show.
The most prominent, probably member of the show, actually.
what was it? The situation?
The situation is on his way for tax evasion.
That's not surprising at all.
It's
Nope.
always how they get you.
That's
It worked for Al Capone. It works for
it
the
happens
situation.
to every Italian eventually. I better watch out.
Wow.
I mean,
So
come on.
So, So Enzo was fired on his own accord. He managed sort of unsurprisingly, knowing that he's like a real life version of the characters the Jersey Shore guys play on television. He got picked up for rape charges in Phoenix, and he got fired shortly after that. The charges were never turned into an indictment. So
they probably settled out of court or something.
No, they were never even pursued by the police. I don't really care to comment too much about it because it's one thing to say that they aren't very credible, but the woman who was accusing him was susceptible to mental illness. So it's probably more likely that they were not credible because the police did not believe that she was believable. Doesn't mean that they didn't happen. It's a failure on everybody's case. That
actually has been the source of a lot of criticisms of the police in recent years. It's like maybe these people are like not good mentally because they've been abused their whole lives. Jeez.
Right. So the allegations were never taken credibly, but he was fired anyway. So good riddance. They tried to make a character out of Big Cass for a while, but it didn't seem like they took it very seriously. He was the guy that they gave to Daniel Bryan when Daniel Bryan came out of retirement a few years ago. I guess they figured that it would give him a little bit of heat to have him work with a major fan favorite. They did the worst thing his entrance almost seemed like a joke because they put like Big Cass up in big letters and he's like 7 feet tall. So when he came out, he would cover the C, so it looked like his Kron just said big.
Come on.
So it looked like his Tron just said big ass every time he walked to the ring, and like I could not like watch him come out without just like cracking the fuck up.
Stupid.
He had like next to no personality. He was terrible at promos. I mean, he seemed like a pretty down to earth guy, in interviews, but he had no like charisma that popped on the screen. So he really needed Enzo as his tag team partner to like speak on his behalf. And so when Enzo was gone, it was just a matter of time before Cass got fired. And then it turned out like backstage, everybody hated him. He was like a really vocal Trump supporter, so he was not popular amongst the younger members of the wrestling fan base. He was very popular with Vince McMahon, I'm sure, but not popular among the younger wrestlers. He had an incident apparently where he got like locked in a toilet on one of the buses that they used to like travel the country, and then he like broke his way out, and there was like shit all over the place, and like
Jesus,
like it almost sounds like
big
a cartoon.
ass
like,
indeed.
These two fucking guys just could not do anything right, and so they both got fired. They tried to like mope around on the indie circuit for a while, and the rumor was that they had just gotten rehired as a unit so they could reunite by Ring of Honor, which is one of the major lower level promotions. They're owned by Sinclair Broadcasting, which is a major right-wing broadcasting company here in America. So they should like
aren't
their
they
viewpoints,
based out of Southern California, something like that?
I don't know where they are. I just know that they're sort of notorious for strong arming a lot of for like owning a tremendous number of local like news stations, and for like forcing them to push a lot of right-wing editorials.
Yeah, they even had like there was a viral video going around about them like about a year or two back.
Yeah.
Where they basically had all of their anchors say the same bullshit on broadcast.
Oh yeah, wasn't that like it was like 100 different videos like of everyone saying literally the same thing at the same time, and it was kind of creepy.
So that's Sinclair. So yeah. So it means it's very difficult to wind up with ethical consumption of professional wrestling because a lot of the wrestling companies are owned by pieces of shit. But anyway, so they. Oh,
actually, well, speaking of pieces of shit, going back to like that trailer like toilet fiasco, you said the two tag team members were who? Big Cass and Enzo.
Enzo Amore was the little guy. Yeah.
So of the two guys, I guess that would make Big Cass the number 2 guy.
Yes.
Hey,
I get the joke. I appreciate that you. It
wasn't. See what I did there?
It wasn't very funny, but the lengths that you went to make sure that you got your joke in was very funny.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna do it at the time, but then you talked about Sinclair. I'm like, well, the moment's lost. So then you said, "Owned by pieces of shit." I'm like, oh, I can bring it back.
Finally, my time to shine.
You
eat pieces of shit
anyway,
for breakfast?
No.
So they actually they had been signed by Ring of Honor supposedly, and they made their debut at the show at Madison Square Garden that they had been running in tandem with New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's a big like super card, and like one of the first like really big show. The first show that New Japan has ever run at Madison Square. All their previous shows have been in California. So the show was a pretty big deal. And in one of the tag matches, they had Enzo and Big Cass jump out of the stands and attack the losers of the most recent tag team match. So, like, it obviously was not intended to be a reference to the Hall of Fame, but it seemed like something in really poor taste that just came at the wrong time. So it wound up, like, not making the broadcast at all, like, confusing a lot of the fans. And, like, the punchline at the end was that it was just fucking Enzo and Big Cass, who nobody really liked anymore. So that might have been, like, their last shot, you know, to, like, make a name back for themselves and to, like, have their careers revitalized. So, like, we'll see what happens to them. I'm not, like, holding my breath. I don't, like, really care if they're successful professional wrestlers anymore, you know, but that was, like, a little bit of interesting piece of fallout from what happened to Bret Hart. So, yeah. So that was the Hall of Fame ceremony. I guess I'll go over the WrestleMania card a little bit, just as a referendum on, like, where the business is going. So surprisingly, all the big, like, baby faces won. So Kofi Kingston won the World WWE Championship against Daniel Bryan. So Bryan, as a heel, did a great job putting him over. He made him look like $1 million. He really, like, sold that storyline tremendously. Kingston's his buddies in the New Day, Xavier Woods and Big E, they were so excited for Kofi. I was so happy to see them. Like, Xavier was just like bawling his eyes out the entire time, and they immortalized it in a shirt. Like, so we're gonna see his ugly cry for, like, the rest of time every time we celebrate Kofi's victory. So I was pretty happy about that. Seth Rollins beat Brock Lesnar in the opening match. He found Lesnar's one weakness, which is, like, getting kicked in the dick repeatedly.
That's quite the weakness.
So this is a bit of a thing with Lesnar. Like, they've written themselves into a corner by having this, like, unstoppable MMA guy who seems to be able to, like, win because he can't even really tell if the other guys know they're really in a fight or not. Like, so when in his first, like, real feud after he beat The Undertaker, it was, like, The Undertaker's revenge. The Undertaker, like, interrupted one of his matches and just, like, kicked him in the dick. And so, like, that's been, like, a thing, like Lesnar versus AJ Styles, kicking the dick, and Lesnar's down, versus Daniel Bryan, kicking the dick, and he's down. Like, that was the only time during any of those matches where it really felt like any of these guys had a real chance of winning. The Undertaker one was the funniest because after he kicked him in the dick in the actual match, after kicking him in the dick once already just to set up the match, the Undertaker put Lesnar in a submission hold, and Lesnar passed out while giving him the finger. It was, like, it was really a really funny image, but one of the least satisfying endings to, like, a pay-per-view main event I've ever seen. So yeah, the Rollins thing kind of went the same way. The referee was distracted. Rollins punched him in the gonads, and then delivered his finishing move 3 times. And the match was only, like, 2 minutes long, you know. But Lesnar lost. And now I think he's off television. I think that was the end of his current contract. So you can't really say that Rollins beat him cleanly, because the low blow is definitely not, like, a babyface tactic.
Yeah.
But it is, like, an MMA thing. You know, obviously low blows are not permitted in real combat sports either, and in MMA it's a really big deal. If you get, like, even accidentally punched in the nuts, then you get, like, a break. You get, like, almost. It
is now. I should add, like, UFC was founded on the fact that, like, you could basically do whatever you want in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that was UFC, but, like, combat sports had existed for quite a while, like, here and also in Japan. And like, the rules... So, somewhat famously, Muhammad Ali had what was originally called the Fight of the Century, like, one of the biggest closed-circuit fights in the world history, against Antonio Inoki in, I think 1978. And it was intended to be... So this is one... Inoki was a wrestler who also had, like, a big hard-on for MMA. He was a big fan. He had always wanted to start his own promotion, always wanted to get involved in MMA fights. And so he had gotten with Ali's people, and they wanted to have a fight, but from the stories, and we'll never know exactly what was going on, because, again, it was partially, you know, a promotion with a big professional wrestler, you know. But the word was always that Ali's people were never really sure if this was supposed to be a real fight, like a shoot fight, or a scripted wrestling match. And so, and even at times when they thought it would be a scripted match, they thought that Inoki might go off script and go into business for himself and actually try to take Ali down when he wasn't expecting it to make a name for himself. So they like installed all these weird rules in the match where Inoki wasn't allowed to throw any kicks unless he was on the ground. And so it's really circumstance dependent, like what the rule set is for an MMA fight. It's dependent on what makes a good show. It's not a good show when two guys are like lounging around on the ground all the time because
Mayweather makes all kinds of concessions like these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Mayweather is like the last big, like really big heavyweight boxer, or like one of the last big guys before the rise of MMA. He recently ended his career 50-0. He's known for being a big defensive fighter. He's not a knockout artist. So a lot of his fights are not popular to watch because they're not fun. At least by the standpoint of the casual fan, because they're not like a Mike Tyson fight. They don't end in a big knockout. But they do often have a lot of good boxing. I watched the McGregor fight, which is his last really big fight, and it was actually really fun. Anyway, so yeah, Lesnar lost to a low blow. I guess it's one of the only believable weaknesses that he had. The best joke.
Who knew that kicking a gigantic man in the nuts would hurt him really badly?
The best joke that I ever heard about this was that someone said that like his mom must have dipped him in the river Styx by his penis.
Yeah. Was it? Yeah, that's pretty. Well, it wasn't Styx, was it? Well, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm ruining the joke.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean.
Yeah.
No. That's the Hercules thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Styx, wasn't that like the land of the dead river?
Yes.
Oh, come on.
Or maybe there was Leith.
I mean,
Get out of here. It was shale. Who gives a shit? Come on.
Not the part of this podcast I want to get hung up on the most. Okay.
Red-haired Menelaus.
My fave.
Thank you.
That old chestnut.
The crazy power disc.
Windjammers, take a shot.
I'm already out.
I never had a shot to begin with.
So the real. We'll get to the real main event, which was
God, I hope so.
Rousey versus Flair and Lynch, and so it should be noted that by the time the main event actually came on, that we had been watching wrestling for 7.5 hours. So the Wrestlemania started at 5 o'clock when fans trickle into the arena, and the main event match started at like fucking 12:30 at night. This is Eastern time. Where was it was in New Jersey, so that was local time too. And it just felt like everybody was fucking exhausted. And the Kofi Kingston match was the one that kind of had like also like a really good story behind it. So I felt like the crowd expended a lot of his energy watching that match that time. And so this is also keeping in mind that 2 of the matches were built as like squash matches, where they could easily where they basically could have the matches could have easily been ended in a minute if they had to make up time, and they did. And we still wound up watching wrestling until like after fucking midnight. So the crowd was exhausted before the women finally came out. And the match was weird. So Becky Lynch won. She was the big ascendant babyface. She beat Charlotte and Ronda Rousey, and she pinned Ronda Rousey clean-ish. But the match had a strange ending. All 3 of these women are famous for their submission finishers. But it's hard to build to a submission finisher, and it's very rare that a top-tier star taps out to a submission, because it generally means that they're perceived as weak. So like Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock almost never tapped out to any submission ever in their entire careers. I think Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit might have been the only guys who ever had a shot of tapping any of these guys out via submission. Their matches always end in pinfall. And these women didn't really take the time to develop impact finishers that would be used for pinfall finishes. So Charlotte has one that she had coming up through NXT, but it has been since superseded by the Figure 4, which is her father's signature submission finisher. So most of her finishes end in some variant of the Figure 4. Ronda Rousey, of course, is famous for finishing her MMA matches with the armbar. So that usually is how her matches end. And Lynch also uses kind of an armbar, and they had like a weird little Twitter feud about it where like Ronda Rousey kept calling Lynch's finisher like quote unquote that fake ass armbar, ignoring that like Rousey used a version of the armbar that looked really fake and didn't look anything like the one that she used in MMA, because she didn't want to like accidentally break somebody's fucking arm.
Yeah,
sure.
So Rousey, that had been the champion for quite some time, and they had been building up this kind of like body slam called Piper's Pit after her based on her her taking after Roddy Piper. Yeah, she's a big fan of Roddy Piper. She's called Rowdy Ronda Rousey as an homage to him, and she wears his jacket to the ring that was bestowed upon her before he passed away. So she has an impact finisher, but her matches don't really build to it because it's not her signature finisher. It's really something that she uses to soften people up, and if it happens to finish a match, it's because her opponent is usually lower tier. So it's not like an exclamation point in the narrative when she tries or goes for the Piper's Pit. But that's how the match ended. She went for the Piper's Pit, Lynch shifted her weight, and wound up getting Rousey into a pinning position, and the referee counted 3. Rousey actually struggled a little bit too hard. So there's like a wiggle that wrestlers do when they want to pretend like they're struggling to get out of a pin, but they don't want to accidentally get their shoulders off the mat.
Sure.
And it looks really weird, like they're rocking back and forth. It's really recognizable if you see it. And Rousey didn't know how to do that. It seems she really tried to struggle to get out of the pin and wound up doing the unspeakable, which is her shoulder came up off the mat while the referee was still counting. WWF referees are expected to count as though it was a real fight, as though they didn't know the outcome of the match. So it's a bit of a cardinal sin that her shoulder came up and the referee kept counting, and it really caused them problems when they went off the air because now the announcers there's literally like 2 million people watching this right this second. You can't pretend
this was a big match for a really big event.
Right.
Well, I mean, I would imagine the proper scenario would have been to be like, "Uh-oh, she's off," and then just get a repin.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what they're supposed to do.
Right. So, but you can't do that with the finish of a match. If it's a single move and you fuck it up, usually you either you do it again. Well, I mean, you're not supposed to do it again, but if it's supposed to set something up, you just use some other less interesting transition to get the match to the point where it's supposed to be. But this is the fucking finish. You can't do it over. Especially for a flash finish that's supposed to be a big shock. It left people with the wrong taste in their mouths at the end of what was otherwise an extremely satisfying weekend of wrestling. And so you want, if Becky Lynch is supposed to be the face of the company, the first female wrestler to be the face of the company in its history, then you kind of want it to be decisive. I mean, It's nice that she won in the main event of WrestleMania. That's already fairly historic, and she beat Ric Flair's daughter in the match, which is also a pretty big feather to have in your cap. And it was winner take all, which means she now holds both of the women's titles, so she's pretty much as high in the company as you can possibly be. So to nitpick on this kind of thing almost seems
trivial.
It seems trivial, but it means that her match isn't the once in a lifetime kind of moment that you really would have wanted it to be. You want that moment to be memorable, and it's memorable, but not.
You want there to be a payoff,
right? So between the fact that it was a setup that didn't seem like a finishing setup, and there hadn't really been a lot of finishing setup, it kind of made people feel like maybe they cut something from the match because the event had been running for over 7 hours and it probably needed to end soon. But why didn't they cut something from the middle, and then do a real finishing sequence? It would have felt rushed, but at least you would have had that signature moment. Also, like I said, Lynch didn't have an impact finisher, so it felt like they didn't really know what they were building towards. And that might be a failure of Vince, ignoring that part of building his women's division, that he's putting them in the main event because that's the narrative they want to support, but they haven't really put the work in to make them to give a main event caliber match.
Sure.
The narrative build up. In general, I had a lot of fun watching it. There isn't a lot of interesting fallout, in the usually the Raw after WrestleMania is very exciting because they bring a lot of people up from NXT. They sometimes they re-sign people you haven't seen in a while. Sometimes they even bring people out of retirement. They did bring The Undertaker out on the Raw after WrestleMania. This was the first time in 18 years he did not perform at WrestleMania, and he showed up to set up his match at the next Saudi Arabia show, which basically confirms that The Undertaker is now a Saudi Arabia-only attraction and will not really be wrestling significantly at North American-based WWF pay-per-views, which is kind of a shame. He looks like he's in great shape, but I'm not a big fan of the Saudi shows or the country, and it
for good
hurts
reasons.
And it hurts to see Vince spending so much money and so many resources on promoting it when I'm trying to enjoy when I'm only trying to pretend like I don't care about the regular shitty things that Vince McMahon does on a daily basis. So it's a bit unfortunate. I guess let's see. I'd like to touch briefly on the tag match just as a note because you might find this interesting. So the Raw brand tag match was between the current champions and the challengers of these guys, Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins. So Kurt Hawkins might arguably be like the most dangerous person in all of WWF for someone's like actual career, because at the time he had been brought in after they had reinstated the brand split, the roster split between Raw and SmackDown as like filler. He was intended to be like a low level jobber. He's the other guy besides Heath Slater. So like Heath Slater is the jobber on SmackDown and Kurt Hawkins is the jobber on Raw. He's like the absolute bottom guy in the totem pole. And someone had noted that like he really, like, even for a jobber, didn't seem to get any offense in and never seemed to win any matches. And in fact, he had been in like a 269 match losing streak.
Jeez.
So he came out basically like Goldberg, and he said like who wants to come out and have a chance to make history and wrestle me and be the person to break my losing streak? And
that's pretty good.
Like in kayfabe, that's like fucking lethal. If you lose to the guy who never wins a fucking match, then that's like a death blow to ever being taken seriously in your career.
And
like,
to
as
put
a
things in
wrestler.
Perspective, like you said, 269, statistically, losing to him is over twice as embarrassing as losing to Glass Joe.
Yes, that's the kind of hard-hitting analysis that I expect from this podcast.
You know what's funny is when I was a little kid and I used to watch wrestling back then, when in the syndicated stuff, like on Saturday mornings,
Mm-hmm.
I knew if the guy had a normal name, he was gonna lose.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I knew immediately.
You're not like a cool like comic book
no,
hero
if
name.
if he wasn't like Bret the Hitman Hart or whatever.
Yeah.
If he just like was named like Joe Jane or whatever, just like some guy I'd never heard of, he was gonna lose. And even I knew that back then. So it's just kind of
So let's remember that that's what James Ellsworth was. He was like the out of shape, like Stretch Armstrong of a human being, like floppy looking guy who had a regular name and was there to lose in 5 seconds, and he turned into like a phenomenon. But anyway, Hawkso
and a few men who wish they had a chin.
Yes.
He hit him with no chin music.
Man, you guys love that clip.
That was amazing. The look on his face, like, what?
What am I even doing here?
Oh, that was so good.
So the other guy, Ryder, he was also like a guy who seemed like he had been done dirty by the WWF in general. He was one of the first guys who took it upon himself to get famous on the internet. He had a little YouTube show that he ran before the WWF really had a YouTube channel, and he had like a social media presence before the main company like required wrestlers to promote their feuds on social media. So he had like 1 million followers on Twitter or something, and he had like this belt that he called the Internet Championship that he carried around with him, and he like used that to promote his character while he was outside of the auspices of WWF. And they don't like that. They don't like you when you get over in a way that because it means that they might be trying to position you as the heel, but people are cheering for you because they watch your stupid YouTube show. So they really screwed him over.
It's not a sanctioned storyline. In other words,
it means they have to rewrite continuously on the fly to make up for the whims of the internet, which are impossible to follow.
Yeah,
and change daily.
Sure.
So he did wind up winning the U.S. title for a little while because they could not ignore the fact that he was a fan favorite, especially among the fans who went to wrestling events. It should be noted that what people root for when they're watching on television, the couple of million people who watch on TV, is very different from the 10,000 people or so who watch at the actual events, who are committed enough to continuously go to house shows and show up in the audiences of live events. Those people tend to be way more plugged in and way more hardcore. So it often meant that like CM Punk had the same problem, all these internet, Daniel Bryan had the same problem. People were always cheering for them, even when they're trying to play the heel, because and
what a problem.
It's a good problem to have, but one that Vince really responds poorly to. So he wound up getting buried hardcore. He became a jobber for years. He got hurt a lot. He won the Intercontinental title, and at WrestleMania 31 out of completely fucking nowhere, and then lost it like literally the next day on Raw. That was like his one shining moment. And then he got paired with Kurt Hawkins as like the other guy who has to support this absolute load of a human being who's lost his last 270 matches, and of course they won. That was the story. This time it was actually the build that they're like these two nobodies, these like real genuine underdogs. It was like a 16 seed beating a 1 seed in the men's basketball tournament. It was like a historic upset. So they won the titles, and they kept them. They still have them after having their title rematch on Raw. So, I mean, I don't even remember what Kurt Hawkins' finisher is. So I don't know like why I'm going to be invested in watching these guys moving forward. But it was pretty cool to see. So Ryder is from Long Island, and WrestleMania was in the Barclays. It was in MetLife Stadium in New York New York this year. So he got his big win in front of his hometown crowd. And it'll probably be the next most recent like shining moment in his career. So I'm pretty happy for him, particularly to see that Vince allowed him to have that after taking his whole career away from him a few years ago. So it's pretty nice. I think that's about it. We talked a lot about the Hall of Fame ceremony, and we talked a lot about WrestleMania 2 weeks ago. So I don't really want to belabor it too much more. You guys
that's okay. Well, we'll be belay fan stuff because we actually had a lot of reactions this week, and I want to give it its due time. So I definitely want to celebrate everybody's involvement. So maybe we'll even have like a more fan focused corrective next week. Just based on that. I did want to talk a little bit about how my girlfriend and I have been making conscious efforts to lose weight.
Nice.
So we have started eating half sandwiches and not getting fries with anything when we go out, and it's been working out really well for us. We just generally feel better. I've lost a couple pounds on my own, so I'm down to like 153.
Nice.
And it's with making a minor change in my diet. So I did want to speak to that because we hadn't done Vice's weigh-in in a couple weeks. So I did want to update people and let everybody know that I was still working at it. And it's way easier if you have the support of those around you, or if somebody else is doing it with you. Because you can rely on each other for support and be like, nah, you shouldn't order that or whatever like that. So, I did want to let everybody know about that. And
by the way, speaking of like, oh no, you shouldn't order that. Like my brother's been making a conscious effort to lose/maintain weight and everything like that. And he actually does the thing where he has some sort of, I don't know what it is, like an app on his phone or something that counts the calories of whatever he's eating, so he'll like be conscious of that at all times. So I should only have this much of this food, etc. Sure. And that makes all kinds of difference.
I actually do the same thing as Vice now, and it was because you brought this up a couple weeks ago that like when I go into the city I work in Manhattan, so there's a lot of easily available not very healthy food. So when I get like a burrito or something, I eat like half of it, especially something with a lot of avocado that's very heavy. I find that it fills me up to have half of it, and I put it in the fridge.
Yeah, and also it's cheaper that way. You can get 2 meals out of it, and believe me when I say this, you don't miss the other half once you've taken a second to like digest. You don't actually miss it.
Well, that's the whole thing. Like there are kind of 2 things about that. Number 1, if you eat slowly, then your body will understand that it has eaten before you finish the meal, which is nice. But also, I've heard that I think we might have even mentioned this in the podcast before, but I've heard that it's very easy to, like, let's say you only have 3 slices of pizza left, and you have 2, and you're like, it's just 1 more. Like, that's exactly the problem. You're never supposed to eat to get rid of the food. You're supposed to eat it because you're hungry. So, like, when you're, like, let yourself know when you are done, or even better, before you start eating, tell yourself, this is how much I will eat. It's almost like planning out your day so you don't like waste time in the middle of the day. It's like the same thing. If you tell yourself, this is how much I plan to eat for a meal or a snack or whatever, you eat that much and then you put the rest away. Like, for example, Like Ritz crackers, if you just handed me a sleeve of those, I could probably destroy the entire thing.
Demolish.
But
It's like a tube of Pringles, like very easily.
yeah, it's like
you could take care of that.
you can't stop like the
Like a
advertisement
sleeve
says.
of Thin Mints. You could
Like,
eat
one
a
of the-
Yeah, it's
sleeve
brutal.
of Thin
But the thing is, though, like one of the things I like to do, I'll just finish this thought real quick, OldManStompy. But what I was bringing up with the Ritz crackers thing is like I love to have peanut butter crackers, just spread peanut butter and Ritz. It's the best. So what I do is I take out 5 crackers, put them on a plate, put peanut butter on them, put all the rest of the shit away. I eat my 5 peanut butter crackers. That's it. I don't just have the tube in front of me like I could eat one more. It's not that big because that's the killer.
So all I meant to say was that like one of the hardest things when you're trying to be on a diet is like just straight up portion control. Just because most of modern food packaging is designed to foil portion control.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but in restaurants it's even worse because we're accustomed just visually to clearing the plate, and so like I think we've also mentioned this several times on the podcast. But if the restaurants served you simply smaller plates and filled those, you probably wouldn't even notice. You'd eat everything on the plate and be like, well, that was nice, and you don't have any leftovers, but you've eaten less than you would have on a bigger plate. It's like, it's a lot of eating is psychological.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna get back to on cutting your sandwich in half before you start eating it. That's already portioning, like giving yourself a hard place to stop.
And again, out of sight, out of mind. If you put away the other half, you're like, I have this in my hand, and you eat it, and it's gone.
It's like I have this half hamburger. I'm not going to start eating this other half hamburger. Just
hamburgers are quite heavy too.
Oh
like,
yeah. You know, a lot of the best hamburger places around will serve you a $1,500 or 1,500 calorie burger, you know, that kind of thing. So,
it's no joke.
I just wanted to say that it's working well, and you know, we're supporting each other on it. So, I'm really looking forward to moving forward with her and continuing on. I know it's been taking me a long time, but keep in mind where I've been with this kind of thing. I've been the kind of person that, like, you know, used to gain weight very easily. I've been able to maintain my weight for as long as I restarted, you know, doing Vice's Way In. So just think about that. That's a very tough thing for me to do. And any time that I've gained weight it has been extremely momentarily. I've been right back to where I was or even a little lower. So hopefully I can make some momentum. That's my real struggle, is make some momentum in losing. But maintaining is certainly not a bad thing, and being consistent. So hopefully I'll continue on my downward slope here, and hopefully I'll get into the 140s. It would be very phenomenal. But that'll be the show for this week. I really do want to emphasize how much we really enjoyed the fan comments and questions that were added this week. I don't want to diminish that at all. I wanted to have OldManStompy, you know, talk his piece here, but that's why I want to give you your due diligence in the next episode of Corrective. I want you guys to have your spotlight, because you added a lot of valuable commentary, and we need to celebrate that, because that's great. So that's the show for this week. We will continue on. We want to thank our fans who contributed questions and comments. Please keep us supplied with awesome topics by submitting your own via the YouTube and Soundcloud pages. While there, give us thumbs ups, likes, and 5-star ratings on iTunes. It helps promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement helps keep the show going. Once again, you guys have been phenomenal lately. Please keep it up. You know, we've even had a couple new voices recently, and that's a big deal for us. Even one person that's never spoken up before is going to be noticed, and we will celebrate it. You could also catch us on Tuesdays for our sister podcast, Corrective Consciousness, the in-depth look at this week in our lives. Finally, you can friend me as vysethebold on Steam, PSN, Xbox Live, Twitter, Battle.net, and Switch.
And you could follow me on my YouTube channel, Lotus Prince. You can hit me up on Twitter at Lotus Prince. And finally, if you are interested in seeing my videos early, getting in on exclusive live streams like Kingsfield on the PS1, the most popular game ever made.
Which one?
Actually, good question. American Kingsfield 1, which is Japanese Kingsfield 2.
I'm
That's what
regular
doing currently.
Kingsfield.
You know what the funny thing is? People made fun of Kingsfield when it came out. Like, what is this lame game? But, like...
It had a
I mean,
predecessor.
forgetting the fact that in retrospect, people see what they were trying to do there, and there's more of an appreciation for it. The funny thing is, even back in the age where people just hated on Kingsfield, if they had ever seen Japanese Kingsfield, which I still like, American Kingsfield is, like Kingsfield 2, is clearly a better game anyway.
Yeah.
So it could have been even
The
worse.
original is very ancient.
It's Grimrock 1 versus Grimrock 2. Like, game 1 is just go through a dungeon. That's the whole game.
Wait, what about the Dinobots?
Oh, that took me a second. Jeez. Oof, you got me. But anyway, finally, if you were interested in seeing my live streams like I was just talking about, selecting upcoming games for you to Let's Play, and finally getting involved in a Discord chat among me and other patrons, then perhaps consider swinging by my Patreon account, which can be found at patreon.com/Lotus Prince.
And you can find me as OldManStompy on most major gaming and social media networks except for Steam, but don't bother because I've got nothing left to say. I left it all out on the table here in this podcast, and I need a couple of weeks to fill back up again.
All right, guys. We'll catch you on Tuesday for another episode of Reactive.
Until next time, everyone.
Cheers.